Now on BBC World News, the BBC's Moscow correspondent Rupert Wingfield-Hayes charts the dramatic rise of Russian economic and military power in 2008. Has the relationship with the West changed for good?
Think of Russia in 2008 and these are almost certainly the images that come to mind. Russian armour rolling through Georgia. For the first time since the collapse of the Soviet Union, the might of Russia's army invading another country.
When the Soviet Union fell apart nearly 20 years ago, Russia essentially gave up its empire without a fight. The rest of the world applauded. The Cold War was over. Russia would now become a normal country. It would join Europe and the West. That at least was the hope expressed by many at the time. But in 2008, a very different Russia has begun to emerge. One that is increasingly wealthy, confident and assertive, but also a Russia that is increasingly hostile to the West and one that is now willing to invade a neighbouring country. So, how have we got here? And how worried should the rest of the world be about this new Russia?
To understand the new Russia, you have to come out here, to the vast emptiness of Siberia. The forest stretches almost unbroken from the Urals to the Pacific. Out here, you don't want to run out of fuel. Where we're going, there are no petrol stations.
This has to be the definition of the middle of nowhere. This is Western Siberia, and around here, this is the only way to get around. We've just flown 2 hours north from the city of Tomsk. We're now refueling. We've still got another hour to go to get to our destination.
We're not flying up here to enjoy the scenery, though. We've come to look for oil. Beneath the Siberian permafrost, there are vast reserves. In 2008, Russia pumped more oil out of the ground here than anywhere else in the world except Saudi Arabia. And according to the oil men, there is plenty more to be found out here.
You noticed from the helicopter, you could see horizon to horizon is how flat this area, and beautiful, quite frankly, it is, with nothing. There's a lot of oil there. There's a lot of oil to be found, in my opinion. The big question will be, due to the logistics and due to prices, how quickly can we get that oil out and get it to market?
As oil prices climbed to record highs, the money flowing into the Kremlin's coffers from here grew to $1 billion a day. And as the money grew, so did the bravado. This was the scene on Red Square for Victory Day on May the 9th. The last time military hardware like this was seen in the middle of Moscow, the Soviet Union was still in existence.
A lot of people outside Russia are asking why it has decided to resurrect this Soviet-style military theatre now. Well, the simple answer is because it can. For the first time in 18 years, Russia has the money. And this sends a very powerful message to the outside world that Russia is back as a military power.
In his first Victory Day speech, Russia's freshly minted president, Dmitry Medvedev, rammed home the point.
Ура!
Our army and navy are gathering strength, and they are growing strong just like Russia itself. And in these powerful Russian weapons lies the tradition of our victories.
Streaking above him, Russia's strategic nuclear bombers. They are now regularly back on patrol. So too is Russia's navy, here on its biggest exercise in 20 years, off the coast of France. Few at the time thought this military posturing in spring would end in a summer war. But if you knew where to look, the signs of a coming conflict were already there. The place to look was Georgia.
This is the bridge over the Inguri River, and ahead up here is the border with Abkhazia. And this is the only way into what is probably the most forgotten and isolated conflict zone in the whole of Europe.
Abkhazia claims to be an independent country. The capital, Sukhumi, still bears the scars of the war against Georgia. Georgia has long vowed to take this beautiful coastline back. In May, Georgia released this video. It claims to show a Russian fighter jet shooting down a Georgian military drone over Abkhazia. In Sukhumi, I was taken to see the carcass of another Georgian drone. The Abkhazians claimed they'd shot it down the day before.
This is 24th of January 2008.
Abkhazia's president told me the drones were proof Georgia was preparing a new attack.
Georgia has moved large numbers of troops up to the border zone. There are constant border provocations. We are ready for dialogue, but first the Georgians must move their forces back from the border area.
But the Georgian government pointed to this: hundreds of Russian paratroopers driving into Abkhazia in armoured vehicles. Georgia's president, Mikhail Saakashvili, told me this was tantamount to a Russian annexation.
They start to apply directly their dealings, their jurisdiction to those parts against every basic principle of international law. On the ground, they've applied basically, they brought in their airborne troops, and I think certainly the situation is pretty precarious.
You talked there about all the things that Russia is doing. What do you believe Russia's game is?
They brought in troops, and they're watching very carefully what the rest of the world would say. And, you know, if the world doesn't react strongly enough, or just limits itself to toothless statements, or just general declarations, certainly the situation is not going to improve by itself. It will get worse.
Most thought the Georgian leader was crying wolf. Few believed this tiny mountain nation would be bold or foolish enough to take on the might of Russia. But then on August the 8th, as the world's attention was on the opening of the Olympics in Beijing, the unthinkable happened. Georgian troops began bombarding the breakaway enclave of South Ossetia. The next day, Georgian ground forces took the South Ossetian capital, Skinvali. But their victory was short-lived. Within hours, Russian armor began pouring across the Caucasus, driving the Georgians before them. In Tbilisi, President Saakashvili suddenly looked like he had bitten off more than he could chew. The war was a disaster for Georgia. Russia looked supreme. But it didn't last. As Russian forces moved into South Ossetia, the tiny enclave burned. Georgian villages along the main road south from the Russian border were systematically destroyed. When we arrived 2 weeks later, the ruins were still smouldering.
Just a month ago, these villages around Skinvali were home to hundreds of Georgian families who lived reasonably comfortably next to their Ossetian neighbours. But now, as far as we can tell, there isn't a single Georgian family left here, and every single building, bar none, has been systematically burned, looted, and in some cases even bulldozed.
The whole Georgian population of South Ossetia had fled. As we looked on, the casual looting of their homes and businesses continued. This had all the hallmarks of ethnic cleansing. Further south in the Russian-controlled buffer zone, we found more evidence of atrocities. This man shows me where his brother was murdered in front of him.
So he's saying that about 20 Ossetian militiamen came here and they got hold of his brother, they took him into this room, they killed him, and then they set fire to the room. That's why it's all burnt out. You can see there's also gunshots here.
For Russia, the war was starting to turn from victory into a PR disaster.